Grace to you and peace from God who is, who was, and who is to come. Amen. So, I have something to confess to all of you, and I hope it will not be too shocking for you. I'm very glad you're all seated. I'm a really big Walt Disney World fan. I really enjoy going down there to Florida regardless of the time of year. I don't really understand it myself, so please don't ask me, but it's not just me, it's at least 3/4 of my entire family. Now, I fortunately had the good fortune just a couple of weeks ago to go with my son Evan and Flat Jesus down to Walt Disney World. This is how much of a fan that Evan and I are. First of all, we have annual passes. We live in Pennsylvania. It's in Florida. We have annual passes. But our plane landed a couple of minutes before 8 o'clock in the evening. And between 8 p.m. and 9:30 p.m., we were able to get off the plane, rent a car, drive the 25 minutes to Walt Disney World, park the car at the Ticket and Transportation Center, get on the monorail, and ride over to the Magic Kingdom, all the while watching the fireworks as the evening program was going on. Then, since we had a fast pass for Big Thunder Mountain, which is all the way at the back end of Magic Kingdom, and since the fireworks program had gone off, which means that the park would be closing in a half an hour, we had to be like salmon going upstream against this sea of people trying to leave the park. And still, we made our 9:30 fast pass. We were there by 9:32. Now, I will gladly speak with you at great length and probably bore you as well about how much I enjoy going to Walt Disney World. The things to do there, the places to stay, the great foods to eat, and of course, there are also the rides and attractions. I long ago realized, though, that I would rather talk to people about Walt Disney World than just about anything else, including my faith. Or perhaps I should say I find it easier to talk to strangers about Walt Disney World than matters of faith. One of the days there, we were standing in line waiting to get into one of the parks, and the woman in front of me, she had one of those motorized scooters and was wearing sandals, and I noticed that her toenails were all painted in Disney colors, had little hidden Mickeys on them, and I complimented her on her toenails, and then she showed me her fingernails. I would never talk to anybody in a line otherwise outside of Walt Disney World. Maybe a similar thing is true in your life. Faith is important to you. Faith helps to fundamentally shape who you are, but you'd rather have a root canal without anesthesia than talk to anybody about faith, let alone a stranger. But if you were asked about something you loved, like, I don't know, the Steelers, or the Phillies, or your garden, or the finale to Game of Thrones, or whatever it is that gets you excited, talking about that to a stranger really probably wouldn't be that difficult. Faith, believing in something, is a powerful thing and can be used in a positive way to unite people. Unfortunately, faith can also be used in a negative manner and used to force people apart as well. In our reading from Acts, talking about faith brought both a split and a unity. The story, briefly, Paul and Silas are in Philippi. We heard Pastor Horner give us a sermon a couple weeks ago about Philippi and Lydia. Paul and Silas end up getting tossed in prison because they healed a slave girl. She was possessed, as our reading said, by a spirit of divination, and therefore she brought her owners a great deal of money by fortune telling. Now, the Greek there literally says that she is possessed by the spirit of the python. And the python is the symbol of the high priestess at Delphi, and therefore implies that the servant girl's ability comes not from the Lord God, but rather from the oracle at Delphi. So in other words, from a Christian believer's point of view, her divination does not come from Christ. Therefore, whatever she says or predicts is suspect. By healing this young woman of her ability to predict the future, Paul and Silas then have caused a loss of a rather lucrative amount of income for her owners, and which kind of ticks them off. And so they in turn drum up some fake charges against Paul and Silas, get them beaten, arrested, and then jailed. Now, when they're in prison after a series of events, Paul and Silas end up converting the jailer and his entire household. It's really a pretty fun story. We heard most of it in our reading today, but go home, read Acts chapter 16. It'll take you less than 10 minutes. In converting to Christianity, these new believers, the jailer and his household, suddenly find themselves split off from all of their former friends and associates, but they also find themselves to be now part of a greater system. They're part of a larger family. They're united with folks who will help them and care for them. And we know this for certain. Well, or rather, all that we know for certain, though, is that they have become believers in Christ. Now, there is a group in place that will help them. Again, we heard that in the sermon about Lydia just a few weeks ago. By the end of chapter 16, though, we hear nothing more about this jailer. We don't get any side plots. We don't get any spin-offs. We don't know if there's a happily ever after for them. What we do know, though, is that people continue to talk about Jesus. And how do we know this? We're here today because 2,000 years later, people are still talking about the story of Jesus. Now, just last night, here in Fellowship Hall, we had 14 of our young people go through the affirmation of baptism program. They've spent the last 9 months learning about, talking about their faith. Now, I told them that I'm not expecting them to leave here and to go back to school or to go out to a street corner or get online and suddenly start proclaiming the gospel. I gave them a week. What I do expect from them is that they will continue in their faith. I expect them to continue to gather together with other believers on a regular and frequent basis. That means more than just Christmas and Easter. Why? Because that's what Jesus calls us to do. To meet with other believers in prayer and fellowship. Not only so that we won't feel alone, but because it's in the meeting together, it's in the gathering with other believers that our own faith is strengthened and we are reminded that we are joined together with God. As a matter of fact, that's what Jesus prays for in our gospel reading. Jesus asks the Father to help us all know that we are one in Christ. One in Christ. Can you imagine that? You know, growing up here in the U.S., I'm sure many of you, like me, we were taught pretty much, from the womb onward that, God helps those that helps themselves, and we need to learn how to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Of course, those ignore the fact that God helps them that helps themselves is not in the Bible, but it's really from Poor Richard's Almanac. And we fail to realize that to pull oneself up by our own bootstraps is not only literally impossible, but it's based on a tall tale about Baron Munchausen, who was a fictional 18th century German nobleman, and it was meant as a platitude to be ridiculed for its own absurdity. We're taught to be self-reliant, which is fine, but that ignores the fact that working together is what makes us smarter and stronger and better able to stand up against those who would oppose us. None of those platitudes support one unity in God. And when we listen to the false teachings, then we fall again and again for those false prophecies like the Oracle of Delphi. We get caught up in the sparkliness of everything, in the distractions of this world, the things, making a lot of money, driving a fancy car, having the latest phone, having a high-powered job, being a social media influencer, going to Walt Disney World. And we avoid the calling of our faith. Did you hear what Jesus prayed for in the gospel reading? He had just finished the very last meal of his life before he's arrested and crucified. He's praying right before they leave the upper room as they're getting ready to go to the Mount of Olives, where he knows he is going to be arrested. First, Jesus prays for himself, and he reminds himself that God the Father is indeed with him. Next, he prays for his disciples. He asks that the disciples would know and feel God's presence in their lives as well. And finally, he prays for the church as a whole, which hasn't even come into existence at that time. Jesus prays for all of us to work together, to be one in God the Father, to work as one flock, to follow one shepherd, that we would be united together. Now, there are lots of different things in our lives that unite us. Sporting events, or being interested in something like medicine or law, or the service industry. What we do for entertainment can unite us. Loving music or movies. What's most important, though, I think, is that we all believe in Christ. And we share that faith with others. We share our faith not only through words, but in actions as well. We share our faith in order that we may indeed be united together.